On the afternoon of the 7th of April 1945, north of Okinawa in the East China Sea, the radio traffic around the battleship Yamato began to thin, then break apart. The ship had left Tokiyama the previous day at 15:20 under Operation Tenichigo, Heaven No. 1, escorted by the light cruiser Yahagi and 8 destroyers. Before dawn, headquarters had sent one last reassurance. Between 0600 and 1000, fighters from Flight Squadron 203 would provide direct air cover. The promise was bigger than the reality. By early afternoon, after repeated carrier air attacks, Yamato's wireless circuits were failing, compartments were flooding, and visual signals were taking over from radios. Then the flagship went quiet. At 15:20, the surviving escorts informed headquarters that Yamato had sunk. At 17:50, the reply came back from Tokyo's command system with the chill of a filing stamp. Cancel the operation. Withdraw to Sasebo. That was what Tokyo said when Yamato stopped responding. Not vengeance, not a final charge. An administrative end to a mission that had already become impossible. To understand why the largest battleship ever completed ended with that kind of message, you have to go back to the problem that created her. In the 1920s and early 1930s, Japanese naval planning rested on the doctrine of Kantai Kessen, the decisive fleet battle. The assumption was simple and rigid. The United States Navy would cross the Pacific. Japanese submarines, land-based aircraft, and night torpedo forces would wear it down. Then the battle line would finish the job in waters closer to Japan. That idea demanded capital ships that could kill harder, at longer range, than anything the Americans could send. Japan also knew it could not match American industrial output ship for ship. So the Naval General Staff demanded superiority by individual unit, not by total number. In October 1934, the Bureau of Naval Construction was asked to design a battleship that would overmatch any American counterpart, carry a main battery larger than the standard 16-inch gun, survive hits from weapons of its own class, and steam far enough for Pacific operations. American ships, Tokyo believed, would remain constrained by the Panama Canal. Japanese designers chose to ignore that limit entirely. Bigger was the point. The men who turned that demand into steel worked under pressure that was technical, political, and deeply secretive. Rear Admiral Keiji Fukuda emerged as the central design authority, building on structural ideas associated with Admiral Yuzuru Hiraga, while steering around the Navy's own recent embarrassments over stability failures and overloaded hulls. The first blueprint appeared in March 1935. It did not settle the argument. 23 major design studies followed before the final plan was fixed in late March 1937. The eventual ship measured 263 meters overall, carried 9 18.1-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, mounted armor so heavy that parts of the side belt reached 410 millimeters, and displaced more than 69,000 tons at full load. Her protection scheme was built to resist shells of the same caliber she carried. Her tactical purpose was brutal and old-fashioned. Meet the enemy battle line, absorb punishment, and break it. But Yamato was not merely an engineering project. She was also a political object. Japan had walked away from treaty limits. Naval prestige mattered. So did secrecy. Construction at Kure was hidden behind immense screens and rope curtains. The dock had to be deepened. Heavy cranes were enlarged. Steel plate production was expanded at great cost, simply to handle armor on a scale Japan had never manufactured before. Men worked in conditions that were hot, loud, and filthy, with welding sparks, paint fumes, and the grit of grinding wheels filling enclosed spaces. This was not ceremonial labor. It was industrial strain at the edge of what the arsenal could manage. Yamato was laid down on the 4th of November 1937, launched on the 8th of August 1940, and completed on the 16th of December 1941, just days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. By then, the world she had been designed for was already changing. That change is what gives Yamato her tragic shape. She entered service as the supreme expression of battleship power, just as naval war was moving somewhere else. During the first part of the Pacific War, she spent long periods, not in dramatic surface combat, but as a fleet flagship, and then in guarded movement between anchorages such as Truk and the inland sea. Her very value made commanders careful with her, too careful. At Leyte Gulf in October 1944, she finally took a central place in battle. Yet even there, the decisive blows against the Japanese fleet came largely from aircraft, submarines, confusion, and fuel pressure, not from the kind of clean line of battle duel that had justified her existence. After battle damage and refits, her anti-aircraft battery was swollen until she carried 152 25mm guns, on paper that looked formidable. In practice, the weapon had short effective range, heavy vibration, a small magazine, and poor sights. Quantity did not solve the problem. The contrast with the American way of war could not have been clearer. Yamato represented concentrated prestige. One hull, one giant battery, one expected moment of decision. The United States built systems, fast carriers, radar fighter direction, replenishment groups, submarines on scouting lines, and fast battleships used as escorts rather than sacred relics. Even the Iowa class, the nearest American parallel in battleship form, was designed for speed within a carrier fleet, not for solitary symbolism. Japanese planners had built a masterpiece for the wrong argument. American planners built a machine for continuous operations over enormous distances. By 1945, that difference was decisive. One side could coordinate fleet airstrikes from moving decks and keep them supplied. The other had a super battleship sitting in home waters while the war closed in around Okinawa, a dead end. A very expensive dead end. The final mission came out of that dead end. On the 29th of March 1945, during discussions about the defense of Okinawa, Emperor Hirohito asked what the Navy was doing. Senior naval leaders took the question as a rebuke. Admiral Seiichi Ito, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, chose action. Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito, who would command the sortie, understood the military facts and objected. So did officers closer to the front. Captain Tomoichi Hara of Yahagi later compared the plan to throwing an egg against a rock. The task force would sail south, fight through to Okinawa, and if Yamato survived, beach herself to act as a fixed gun battery for the army ashore. Fuel was issued for a one-way trip. Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka pressed the mission with a moral argument as much as a strategic one. Later accounts recall the pressure in blunt terms. The ship could not be left intact while soldiers on Okinawa were dying. By the evening of the 6th of April, the men aboard knew the real nature of the order. During the departure assembly, the message from the combined fleet was read aloud. Render this operation the turning point of the war. Many on board knew it would do no such thing. Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida remembered the atmosphere in human terms, not abstract ones. Men drank before sailing. Some wrote letters. Some handed over keepsakes. At 21:44, the American submarine Threadfin sent a detailed sighting report that Yamato intercepted herself. Surprise was gone before midnight. At 0600 on the 7th of April, Yamato launched an Aichi E-13A1 Type 0 Jake floatplane for reconnaissance. Fighters did appear over the force, but only briefly and in numbers too small to matter. By 0832, the formation had been sighted by an American carrier aircraft. At 10:14, Yamato opened fire on 2 Martin Mariner flying boats. That alone told the American commanders what they needed to know. The Japanese surface force had been found, fixed, and reported. In the U.S. system of 1945, that was nearly a death sentence. The attacks that followed exposed the gap between design theory and battlefield reality. Just after noon, lookout reports brought the first incoming raid into view. Yamato opened fire with her main battery, using anti-aircraft shells, and with every lighter weapon that could bear. The noise was punishing. Blast wrecked exposed fittings, and shook crews already working in smoke and cordite fumes. Bomb hits tore into the ship. Torpedoes struck mainly to port, an American choice made to force a fatal list in one direction. Damage control teams ran through darkened passages, carrying reports by hand when phones failed. Water rose where men had to keep working beside boilers, turbines, steam lines, and electrical gear. To correct the list, the order went out to flood starboard engine and boiler spaces. Hundreds of engine room sailors were effectively sacrificed in place, trapped below the armored deck so the ship might live a little longer. It was not enough. Executive Officer Nomura Jiro reported that the damage control officers were dead, and that counterflooding could no longer save the ship. At that point, the mission ceased to be a sortie, and became a sequence of improvised acts by exhausted men. Visual signals replaced reliable radio traffic. Yahagi, herself shattered, had already taken devastating hits and was sinking. Destroyers tried to screen, maneuver, fire, and prepare for rescue all at once. Captain Kosaku Aruga remained with his ship. Vice Admiral Ito, after finally accepting the situation, ordered the operation cancelled and directed the remaining ships to save as many survivors as possible. Around 1423, Yamato rolled to port and her #1 magazine exploded. The blast sent up a column of smoke, visible for miles. The ship that had been intended to dominate a decisive surface battle disappeared under carrier aircraft, fuel shortage, and a command culture that had confused sacrifice with effect. No speech could hide that. No slogan could fix it. The American reaction to Yamato is important because it was so matter-of-fact. U.S. commanders did not treat her as a dueling opponent to be met ship against ship. They treated her as a target set within a larger operational system. Submarines reported her departure. Patrol aircraft kept contact. Task Force 58 launched about 390 carrier aircraft from multiple fleet carriers, rather than risking a surface engagement. Pilots were briefed to concentrate torpedo attacks from one side. That is the key point. The American response was analytical. Identify the vulnerability. Apply mass. Finish the problem quickly. The result was lopsided. U.S. losses amounted to 10 aircraft and 12 aviators. Japanese losses in the force reached more than 4,200 dead, including most of Yamato's crew, Yahagi's men, and sailors from the destroyers Hamikaze, Isokaze, Kasumi, and Asashimo. The scale of destruction was not an accident. It was the meeting of an obsolete operational idea with a mature carrier war machine. The scale behind that meeting was even more punishing. Admiral Toyota later admitted that merely assembling the fuel for the operation had been difficult. About 2,500 tons scraped together when Japan's fuel situation was already desperate. The Americans, by contrast, were sustaining the Okinawa campaign while striking the home islands and keeping fast carrier groups at sea for repeated operations. Yamato had been built as a single answer to industrial inferiority. By April 1945, she embodied that inferiority instead. Japan had put immense skill, secrecy, and resources into one ship that could not alter the campaign around her. The United States answered with scouting, deckloads of aircraft, standardized logistics, and enough production depth that the destruction of the world's largest battleship did not require a special category in American planning. It was simply another mission, brutal, efficient, disposable in the paperwork. The post-war verdict from Japanese officers was remarkably plain. Toyota said there had not been a clear 50-50 chance of success, and that tradition weighed heavily in the decision to send the ships, rather than let them remain idle. The detailed action report of Destroyer Squadron 2 condemned the operation in cold language, arguing that naval actions had to be carried out cautiously and calculatingly, or else they would bring great loss and little benefit. Captain Hara's image was still the best one, an egg against a rock. Yamato did not fail because her steel was poor or because her crew lacked courage. She failed because she belonged to a doctrine the war had already outgrown. She was built for the wrong climax, preserved too long for reasons of prestige, and finally expended in a gesture that could not change Okinawa, could not save the Navy, and could not even reach the beach she was supposed to defend. When the radio traffic died away on the 7th of April 1945, Tokyo's answer was perfectly in character. First, it had demanded action. It had told the crew to turn the tide of war. Then, when the flagship no longer answered, it sent a cancellation to the survivors and ordered them home. That cold little signal, received at 1750, is the truest ending of the Yamato story. Not the explosion, not the myth, the message after the silence. If this story gave you something you hadn't heard before, hit the like button. It tells the platform to put careful, sourced history in front of more people who actually want it. Subscribe if you want the next one.